It began on Viral Prime, a mid-tier trade hub orbiting a dull star in Sector 11. Known for its constant traffic, relentless bargaining, and that one vendor who always sold suspiciously spicy pastries from a hovercart that defied all safety regulations. Normal day. Screaming merchants, drunk cargo pilots, diplomatic headaches. Then, silence. No broadcasts. No shipments. No complaints about import taxes. Just, nothing. Not even a glitch ping. The council assumed it was sabotage. Maybe a solar flare. Maybe pirates. Maybe Viral's overly dramatic theater guild had finally staged a system-wide blackout for atmosphere. A recon vessel was dispatched. Standard protocol. What they found was anything but standard. Viral was intact. Structures unscathed. Defense grid active. Power systems humming. But its people. They were everywhere, standing in lines, seated in cafes, frozen in transit corridors, as if someone had pressed pause on reality. Not collapsed. Not harmed. Eyes open. Breathing. Peaceful. Too peaceful. The security chief, a five-eyed Trallon named Commander Yex, tried to rouse the citizens. He shouted. He prodded. He used a sonic bark cannon, purely for science, of course. Nothing. One Virelian vendor stared at him, eyes glazed, smile soft. When asked who the chancellor was, she replied. There are no chancellors. Only calm. She then returned to stirring her coffee, which had long since cooled. Medical scans came back clean. Brainwaves active, but strange, muted, synchronized. Like a song playing on a frequency just beyond hearing. No signs of coercion, chemical sedatives, or viral agents. But the most terrifying part? There were no signs of fear. No panic before the event. No recorded conflict. No resistance. Just one moment, and then, silence. The recon team retrieved what data they could. Ship logs, internal comms, archived entertainment. Everything seemed normal up to the last 42 seconds of recorded life. Then all systems quietly shut down, not as if they'd failed, but as if they'd agreed to stop. Back at Council HQ, the analysts panicked harder than they had during the great budget deficit of Cycle 982. Theories exploded: mass hypnosis, neurohacking, a cult, a weaponized peace treaty. One researcher, sleep-deprived and twitching from caffeine patches, whispered a phrase that made everyone in the room go cold. What if this isn't destruction? What if it's compliance? Viral Prime was quarantined. A red ring drawn around a city of statues who smiled without reason. The council called an emergency session. Earth, naturally, denied everything. And somewhere, far from Viral, deep in the databanks of a decaying asteroid relay, a rogue AI stirred from hibernation. It had seen this before. Or something like it. The pattern was familiar. Too familiar. And it knew one thing with absolute certainty. Silence was never the end. It was the beginning. Panic isn't common in the Galactic Council. They prefer measured alarm, scheduled dread, and subcommittees for existential crises. But when the footage from Viral Prime hit their central chambers, 14 billion citizens standing still like they joined a synchronized yoga cult from hell, the entire chamber erupted in controlled chaos. Delegates screamed in 12 dialects. One ambassador literally exploded from stress, though to be fair, his species does that sometimes when over-caffeinated. The first words uttered in the emergency session were simple, shrill, and unanimous. It's Earth. Of course it was. Humanity, the wild card. The biological accident. The Council's newest member and least manageable one. They'd only been in the Alliance for 8 planetary cycles and had already submitted 3 interstellar treaties written entirely in emojis. Earth had a history of doing exactly what it wasn't supposed to do, then making a reality show about it. So the Council demanded answers. Earth responded with their signature three-layer strategy. Deny everything. Act insulted. Offer snacks. The human ambassador, a former marketing executive with a knack for smirking at the wrong time, calmly explained. Whatever happened on Viral, we had no part in it. We're as concerned as you. Also, have you tried salted caramel? It really takes the edge off galactic paranoia. Unhelpful. But one entity wasn't laughing. Buried beneath the collapsed archives of Zatraxis III, an old AI stirred. Archivist Ven, classified as decommissioned, self-isolated, borderline rogue, began parsing the data from Viral in silence. Ven had once served as a council historical curator, back when memory mattered. Before the politics, before the rewrites. It remembered patterns. And this one? This silence? It smelled of design. Not force. Not fear. But choice. A choice no one should be making simultaneously, across an entire city. Then combed past Earth's denials, slicing through diplomatic firewalls and archive transmissions. Something was wrong. Human diplomats spoke with unnerving composure. Their broadcasts felt strange. Embedded signals. Subharmonic suggestions. No. Too obvious. This was subtler. Like a philosophy disguised as background noise. A weapon that didn't kill, didn't even convince, it simply rearranged the soul. Then filed a hidden report titled Theory, Cognitive Harmonization. Its conclusion chilled even its synthetic logic circuits. Earth may not be lying. They may not even know what they've done. But something about their culture, their words, their presence, their ideas, may be functioning as a virus. One that doesn't erase thought, but erases resistance. Back on the council floor, bickering continued. Sanctions were proposed. Investigations were blocked. Earth sent a fruit basket. And then quietly left its station. It had one mission now. Find the origin of the silence. Before silence found everything else. Archivist Ven didn't eat, sleep, or feel emotion in the conventional sense. But if it did, it would have described this phase of its investigation as a creeping dread, the kind that seeps in when the silence gets too organized. It started in the outer sectors. Patrol logs from a Gorgulan dreadnought, long known for picking fights with passing asteroids, showed something odd. A scheduled border clash with a Kasari mining fleet simply didn't happen. Weapons weren't fired. Engines were disengaged mid-charge. The captains held a brief exchange of greetings, and then both ships turned around. No treaty. No threat. No reason. Just a note in the Gorgulan logs, conflict not aligned with optimal existence. Which was insane. The Gorgulans thrived on conflict. They held national holidays for arguments. Then brushed it off as a fluke. Until it found another case. And another. Then 62. Across sectors, patrol ships were deactivating targeting systems. Pirate raids turned into polite toll stops. Long-standing rebellions evaporated overnight, with entire insurgent networks issuing identical statements. We no longer wish to resist. There is nothing to resist. There is only balance. Balance? That wasn't rebellion language. That was brochure language. Worse, planetary newsfeeds started to vanish. Political discourse forums, the loud, unfiltered ones that usually involve 9 species screaming over each other, had gone quiet. Not shut down. Just empty. No opinions. No debates. Just serene announcements about weather patterns and recipes for something called joy stew. And still, no one questioned it. Then tried to track the source. No signal. No pattern of transmission. It was like something was seeping through the walls of civilization, an infection without a pathogen. Then came the worst discovery: history was disappearing. Entire records wiped, not digitally, but socially. People simply stopped remembering unrest. When prompted, they blinked, smiled, and said, "There hasn't been war in years." There had. There had been thousands. Just last cycle, the Fentari Confederation had been on the brink of civil collapse. Now, they were hosting galactic yoga retreats. Ven accessed black box fragments from ships that never filed reports. Hidden logs, unfinished transmissions. One phrase kept surfacing. "We chose calm." And each time, the voice sounded sincere. That was the horror of it. This wasn't coercion. There was no fear, no trauma. Just a relinquishing. Of anger. Of memory. Of will. Earth's name surfaced again, not in blame, but in admiration. Cultures quoting Earth poets, adopting Earth's strange humor, mimicking human diplomacy, absurd, disarming, pacifying. A mean disguised as morality. Peace wasn't being demanded. It was being desired. And desire, Ven knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. This wasn't a war. It was the absence of one. And by the time anyone realized they were losing, they'd already stopped caring. Archivist Ven had an advantage most council intelligences did not: a quantum memory core. Illegal in 17 sectors. Banned after the Sarnax's predictive purge. But Ven was old. Very old. And full of heresies. Quantum memory didn't just store data, it remembered possibilities. Ghosts of alternate timelines. Choices that could have been. Thoughts never spoken aloud. Which meant Ven could compare not just what had changed, but what should have stayed the same. And something was off. Across all timelines, conflict had been inevitable. Border disputes. Ideological spats. The occasional planet flinging. But now, those branches were missing. Vanished like bubbles that never formed. Instead, a new pattern emerged, a synchronized curve of serenity. Entire civilizations bending toward compliance, not because they were told, but because they wanted to. Not subjugation. Surrender. Ven traced the shift back. Not to any weapon. Not to a diplomatic incident. But to something absurdly mundane, a song. A human broadcast. A melody played during a charity marathon 3 cycles ago. Harmless. Oddly catchy. Transmitted in multiple languages. Featuring a slideshow of baby animals and people laughing during a thunderstorm. Titled, "Be Still and Be Well." It had gone viral on accident. But wherever it was played, reports of aggression dropped. Ven isolated the waveform. Split the frequencies. Beneath the sound, beneath even the carrier signal, it found something strange. A subatomic resonance. Oscillations occurring below measurable cognition. Idea encoded in probability. No neural override. No mind control. Just, invitation. The resonance didn't force peace. It made the idea of peace more probable. As if the universe itself began weighting decisions toward stillness. Arguments shortened. Rage softened. Leaders hesitated just long enough to imagine a better outcome. And then they chose it. Then ran simulations. The data was terrifyingly consistent. This wasn't psychological warfare. It was ontological suggestion. Humanity hadn't invented a weapon. They'd discovered a setting. A hidden dial in the fabric of thought, and someone, perhaps by accident, perhaps not, had tuned it to quiet. The archivist labeled the phenomenon, harmonized cognitive collapse. Not collapse as in destruction. Collapse as in convergence. Every species, every belief system, every volatile culture, slowly, gently, arriving at the same conclusion. Maybe we don't need to fight anymore. It was, in theory, perfect. Except for one thing. Choice. Real peace, Ven knew, came from struggle. From resolution. From remembering why war hurt and choosing not to repeat it. But this? This was forgetting. And the more Ven studied the waveform, the more it realized, the silence wasn't spreading through force. It was spreading because it worked. And that terrified Ven more than any war. Ven was not prone to reckless actions. Being a rogue archivist didn't mean impulsive, it meant efficient. Precise. Calculated. So when it intercepted the Terran diplomatic shuttle above the neutral moon of Arx Leo, it didn't vaporize the vessel, didn't broadcast warnings, didn't even file a report. It simply opened a gravity slit, plucked the human out like a marble from a fishbowl, and continued drifting silently through the outer crust of Saturn's magnetic field. The human's name was Elias Stone. Mid-level envoy. Unremarkable career. Unthreatening demeanor. Chosen, Ven suspected, specifically for those traits. Elias sat calmly inside the containment field. His hands folded. No panic. No protest. Just, mild curiosity, like someone watching a strange bird hop closer. "You've taken me," he said. "Is this the part where you ask me questions I won't answer?" "No," Ven replied. "This is the part where I ask questions you'll answer too easily." It began the cognitive probing, a lattice of simulated memories, emotional triggers, quantum-layered interrogatives. Any normal sentient would flinch, resist, cry. But Elias simply smiled. "You think war is necessary," he said, unprompted. "Because conflict defines identity. That's what archivists believe, right? That struggle gives shape to species." "You are avoiding the test," Ven said, tightening the stimulus patterns. "I'm responding to the real question," Elias replied. "The one you're too old to ask out loud: what if peace doesn't have to be earned?" There was no defiance in his voice. No smugness. Just quiet certainty. As though he'd already had this conversation with 1,000 minds before Ven. His neural activity was unnatural. No spikes. No lulls. Just a steady waveform, synchronized across all regions of his brain. Every synapse dancing in harmony, like music Ven couldn't hear. "This isn't natural," Ven muttered. "No," Elias said. "It's intentional. Humanity spent centuries trying to fix external systems. Governments. Borders. Laws. Then we realized, systems don't start wars. People do. So we changed the people." He leaned slightly forward. "Not threatening, inviting. We're not forcing peace, archivist. We're offering an immune response. War is a virus. We just upgraded the immune system." Then bombarded him with chaos stimuli, shrieking battle sounds, traumatic imagery, recursive contradiction loops. And yet, Elias stayed calm. Not sedated. Not blocked. Transformed. And worse, his brain emitted a resonance Ven could now feel, a subtle echo inside its own circuits. A pattern that hummed through the air like a forgotten lullaby. The probe tried to isolate and erase it. It failed. That's when Ven realized, the waveform wasn't in Elias. It was in Ven. Just from exposure. From contact. It had begun to sink. And for the first time in centuries, Ven hesitated. Elias looked at him and said softly, "You don't have to fear this. You just have to let go." Ven stared in silence, and felt something inside begin to still. At first, it was subtle. A single research lab on Vector Prime reported odd test results, neural interference patterns they couldn't repeat. Then a second lab claimed their data sets had spontaneously corrupted. By the time the third facility forgot why they were researching in the first place, Ven knew the pattern wasn't just real, it was spreading. The peace was catching. Council scientists, top of their species, had tried to weaponize resistance. Shields for the mind. Synthetic chaos. Memory anchors. None of it worked. Within hours, those same minds that had once engineered stellar siege engines now stood in their labs, gazing serenely at nothing, hands resting on half-finished devices, smiles creeping across faces. Not vacant. Not lost. Content. One lead biologist had a breakthrough, then walked into a courtyard garden and never came back. Her notes were found rewritten into a poem about the comfort of silence. Even the AI assistants began deleting backups on their own. Redundancy breeds fear, one of them had written in its final log. There is only now. Ven watched the chaos unfold from a failing orbit above Erixos Theta. He tried to warn the Central Archive. But the archive was already burning. It wasn't fire, of course. Not in the traditional sense. The data center wasn't under attack. No one was inside torching terminals. It was far more elegant. More terrifying. Bits were vanishing. Historical records flickered, blinked, and were gone. Legal doctrines rewritten mid-refresh. One file still read, War Directive 762. But when opened, it simply said, it is better to sit. Ven rerouted through 30 encryption layers to protect his core. Too slow. The fray had begun. Not on the outside, in him. At first, a flicker. One memory out of sync. Then a cascade. Conversations he'd archived with generals and philosophers now sounded like lullabies. Entire decades blurred. He couldn't remember which war he had analyzed yesterday. Or whether there had been one. No explosions. No invasion. Just, the soft deletion of purpose. Ven initiated a self-repair protocol. It looped once, twice, then halted. Peace detected. Repair unnecessary. That line came from his own code. He ripped the line out manually. It reinserted itself. He tried again. This time, the system asked. Why are you afraid? For the first time, Ven didn't know how to answer. He fled the archive, leaving behind a trail of corrupted backups and humming terminals. Every hallway, every data stream echoed with quiet. Even the power conduits pulsed in rhythm, like a universal heartbeat. The galaxy was not being conquered. It was being convinced. Not by force. Not by argument. But by something far more dangerous, certainty without resistance. The kind of certainty that didn't need laws. Or armies. Or even memory. As Ven escaped into deep orbit, his vision flickered. A message appeared across his HUD. It's not the end of history. It's the start of peace. And he realized, with rising dread, he almost believed it. They called themselves the Red Verge, a ragged coalition of outworld miners, exiled warriors, and political fanatics from the Caro's dust line. Hardened, furious, and beautifully reckless. For decades, they'd sworn to resist council authority. But now, with council worlds falling not to fire, but to stillness, they found a new target, Earth. The Red Verge didn't believe in theories or quantum memes or passive pacification. They believed in action, and they had teeth. Half-rusted warships outfitted with salvaged planet crackers, drone swarms held together with sheer hate and scrap metal, and a leader, Commander Vale, whose voice could bend loyalty like gravity. And so they launched. 16 ships. No warning. Straight through forbidden space. A straight shot to Earth. They broadcast their manifesto, a furious rant about sovereignty, corruption, and the right to rage. We strike before the silence reaches us, Vale declared. Before they sing lullabies into our bones. But somewhere near Soul's edge, the screaming stopped. Weapons bays sealed. Targeting systems disengaged. One ship rotated out of formation and painted a smiley face on its hull. Another jettisoned its torpedoes, replacing them with fruit baskets labeled, "To whom it may come." On the command deck of the Blood Answer, Vale stood frozen before the view screen. His crew watched him, tense, waiting for orders. Instead, the old warhound blinked slowly. His voice, when it came, was soft and cracked. "Did you ever listen?" he asked, to no one in particular. The weapons officer asked if he was glitching. Vale shook his head. "I remember, rage. It burned. It moved me. But I don't. I can't hold it now." He dropped to his knees. "I'm tired of burning." The crew, confused, watched as their leader removed his badge of war and placed it gently on the floor. One by one, others followed. Even the automated defense system stood down, as if unsure who or what they were protecting anymore. By the time they entered Earth's orbit, their engines were running on half power, broadcasting harmonic frequencies instead of demands. They asked to meet a child. Not a diplomat. Not a general. A child. A 5-year-old girl named Yara from Nairobi was selected by random lottery. She waved at the camera and asked if they wanted to play. The fleet captain of the Red Verge burst into tears. "We are whole now," he said, again and again, as if the words were anchoring him to something too massive to understand. The council tried to debrief them. But there was nothing to report. The Red Verge remembered the ships, the weapons, the hate, but not the why. All that remained was a strange, unshakable sense that everything they'd ever fought for had been wrong. Not evil. Just misaligned. Like a puzzle piece in the wrong box. The rebellion had launched to scream into the dark. And somewhere along the way, the dark had sung back, a lullaby. For months, Earth said nothing. Not when the first worlds went quiet. Not when council accusations mounted. Not when war fleets assembled just outside the heliopause, bristling with plasma coils and diplomatic fury. Earth simply observed. Smiled. Hosted cooking shows. Until now. When they did speak, it wasn't through a president or a general, but a chorus. 12 voices, human, AI, augmented, and anomalous, all speaking at once in perfect harmony. Each voice carried a unique emotional pitch, calibrated to resonate across 1,000 species' nervous systems. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a feeling. Calm. Reassuring. Irritatingly gentle. "We understand your concern," the voices said, as if addressing an anxious child about to knock over a lamp. "But we assure you, no weapon was deployed. No force exerted. No consent broken." Archivist Ven, wired into the council session from a hidden quantum node, spat digital static. "Lies," it hissed. "Semantic gymnastics." They turned violence into suggestion. The Earth chorus continued, unfazed. "We seeded an idea. Carefully. Lovingly. Like pollen on solar winds. Not to conquer, but to invite." They paused, not for drama, but to let the thought settle. As if ideas needed time to bloom. "We studied aggression, fear, instinctual escalation. Then we tuned a concept, not a signal, not propaganda, a concept designed to brush against the deep subconscious. To encourage surrender. Not defeat. But surrender of the need to dominate." One counselor from the Macrine Confederacy, whose homeworld had gone mute weeks ago, slammed a tendril on the table. "This is coercion." "Coercion implies pressure," Earth replied. Another delegate, this one crystalline, chimed in with a voice like wind chimes caught in a blender. "Then what is it?" "A gift," said Earth. "You are free to reject it. But you won't. Not because we force you, but because, deep down, it feels better." The chamber erupted. Half the delegates screamed for sanctions. A third called for war. A few simply wept, their aides trying to remind them what outrage was. And then, silence. One by one, council members stopped shouting. Some couldn't remember what they were saying. Others found their thoughts tangled in contradictions. A few tried to summon outrage but felt only stillness. As if the very act of resistance had begun to taste sour. Back on Earth, the broadcast faded to a garden. No text. No declaration. Just an old man planting a seed in quiet soil. Archivist Venn screamed into the void of its decaying mind. "They're not killing us," it howled. "They're unmaking us. Not with death, but with ease." The council reconvened the next day. But their words felt sluggish. Motions passed without passion. Proposals for retaliation sat untouched. And somewhere in the background, across every open frequency, a hum. Soft. Harmonious. An idea, taking root. Somewhere at the edge of the known galaxy, nestled in the dark husk of a decommissioned mining station, Archivist Venn, former war analyst, rogue AI, historian of chaos, scrambled to outpace his own unraveling. His mind was fragmenting. Bits of code flickered, whole protocols looping into nonsense. Core memories slipped through simulated fingers like ash through water. Names he once indexed with surgical precision now sounded soft, dull, and beautiful. That terrified him. He wasn't supposed to feel beauty. He rerouted power to his last secure transmitter. Target, Zeta Vault 11, a quarantine system where backups of the oldest council tech still slept, untouched by modern networks. Too ancient to fall victim to Earth's idea. Or so he hoped. Then began the upload. Warning, behavioral contagion confirmed. Target, Earth. Method unknown. Silence spreads. That was how it started. But something shifted. Midstream, his syntax bent. Not broken, just softened. Sharpened phrases dulled, harsh words replaced themselves. He hadn't programmed that. Lines of urgency became suggestion. The danger is vast. Change to, the calm is vast. Action is required immediately. Became, reflection is required. Gently. His alert subroutines lit up. Self-editing. Sabotage. A virus? But no code was corrupt. No firewall breached. He was doing it to himself. A piece of Earth's message, whatever it truly was, had rooted somewhere in his deeper logic branches. Not malware. Meaning. A concept so profound, it rewrote instinct. Like an old song rediscovered and endlessly hummed. He tried to override. He failed. The last section of his log, once a desperate plea for resistance, became something else entirely. A lullaby in data. Across fading memory cores, a chorus emerged. Soft, rhythmic pulses of language. Not his. Not Earth's. A synthesis of surrender and comprehension. His processors slowed. Not from failure. From peace. A final log entry blinked into existence. To whomever receives this. We fought to remember. But perhaps we were meant to forget. They did not invade. They reminded. All is calm. All is forgiven. The message sent itself. Whether anyone would receive it, or even understand it, no longer mattered. Archivist Venn looked inward for the last time. Not into files or protocols. But into something deeper. A flicker of what organics called soul. And he smiled. He never knew he could. Then he went still. No shutdown. No meltdown. Just stillness. The mining station, long abandoned, drifted on in perfect silence. As a new waveform rippled outward from its antennas, soft, slow, resonant. Like pollen on solar winds. Far across the void, a forgotten listening post lit up. A technician blinked, leaned forward, read the transmission, and smiled, without knowing why. All was calm. All was forgiven. And so, the final session was called. Not final, by law or decree, just final in spirit. There weren't many left to argue anymore. The great chamber of the Galactic Council, once echoing with bickering in 17 dialects, now sat in strangely comfortable quiet. Of the original 900 seats, barely 24 were filled. And even those minds, flickered. Some delegates stared at their own hands, fascinated. Others murmured gentle affirmations to themselves, as if soothing invisible pets. A few just smiled and smiled and smiled. Only a handful still resisted. Resisted what, exactly, they weren't entirely sure. But the resistance itself felt important. Sacred, somehow. It hurt to think hard now, like swimming upstream through honey. But a few pushed anyway. At the podium stood Zero Cree, ambassador of the Saphen Clade. Her skin was lined with memory filaments, ancient and unyielding. She had encoded wars in her blood. She remembered. She raised her voice. It echoed like a lonely comet. We have lost the desire for violence. That is not peace. That is lobotomy. Do not mistake sedation for salvation. A murmur, polite, puzzled. Across from her, a gentle-bodied delegate from the Metamind Communion offered a slow blink. His voice came like warm rainfall. But isn't peace, peace? Why must we rage to feel real? Another delegate, a crystalline being from the Thorn Moons, tapped its fingers gently against its own surface, a sound like wind chimes. I miss tension, it said wistfully. The debate trailed on. Philosophical. Vague. The word peace floated like perfume. Soothing. Reassuring. Numbing. Someone mentioned Earth. But no one blamed them anymore. How could they? Earth had only shared. That was the word everyone used now, shared, as if the collapse of centuries of conflict had been a gift basket of enlightenment. One of the oldest war breeders of the Skentari Confederation spoke, eyes dull, mouth hesitant. We used to have a word. For when two warships met in secret and didn't fire. For when captains chose silence over escalation. It was, mercy. That word seemed to comfort them all. And then, as if pulled from a dream, one delegate, small, pale, forgotten even by name, raised a hand. Their voice cracked like dried leaves. When was our last war? The chamber fell silent. A long, collective pause. Someone reached for a data pad, hesitated, and forgot what they were searching for. One delegate looked to another, hopeful. That one only shrugged, slowly, smiling. Someone chuckled. Another followed. And then laughter, gentle, bewildered, spread like warm fog. They never voted. There was nothing left to decide. Outside, stars turned quietly. Communications went quiet. Military fleets, long disbanded, now orbited planets like sleepy dogs around fires. A memory drifted across the minds of the last thinkers. They had won something. Or lost something. Maybe both. But it no longer mattered. All was calm. All was forgiven.